Hello, welcome to Cognitum, a show dedicated to the present and future of science and technology. I'm your host, Iosif Gershteyn. Today we have with us Philip Maymin, professor of analytics at Fairfield University and author of multiple papers on mindfulness. So Philip, what drew you to mindfulness? I mean, you come from a background of STEM, math, the hard sciences. How did you get into mindfulness?
4 years ago, a friend of mine introduced me to Ellen Langer, and that changed my world. And it's ironic because exactly like you're saying, math, STEM. My undergraduate was at Harvard. I was math and computer science. My friend was at Harvard. He was doing psych with Dr. Langer. And I just sometimes wonder about different paths. Like, what if I had done, I didn't know her then, right? What if I had? What would have changed in my life? I'm not sure. But, once you meet Ellen, she's a force of nature, and she changes your perspective permanently to the way you think about things. And the way she studies mindfulness, that she studied for nearly half a century, is so mind-boggling and so powerful, and summarizes so many disparate perspectives and views on how to live and how to think and how to be, and opens up an opportunity for a whole new level of existence. So it's a very compelling vision.
Could you explain this whole new level of existence?
Yeah. I think one of the things to start with is the way she first started studying mindlessness. Now, if you look at mindfulness today, if you search it, you get all sorts of things like mindful pizzas, mindful hot dogs, mindful hamburgers, mindful everything. And people think it's related to meditation, but it's not. The way she studies mindfulness is it's the active process of noticing new things. And she's had that consistent definition for 50 years. Other definitions have started off as some kind of focus or whatever, and you have to meditate. But they're moving gradually and gradually towards her original constant static definition, which is it's the active process of noticing new things. Once you notice something new, a lot of things happen. So if you look around the room now, notice 3 new things that you've never seen before. Brand new. What does that do to you? First of all, you start to wonder, why didn't I notice those before? If I didn't notice those before, maybe there's other things that I thought I knew that I don't, right? You start to appreciate uncertainty and multiple perspectives and novelty, and that makes you hear, right? You become present and mindful, as opposed to, a knee-jerk reaction kind of mindless automaton. I hear something, I say something. I hear something, I say something, right? You become present. You appreciate uncertainty. You understand that, I don't know how to phrase this in a better way, but that things don't matter. It's bizarre. It's like, we should talk about her understanding of mindful decision-making, but it's there's nothing that's necessarily good or bad just in itself, right? An activity, an item, a perspective, and let's not worry about extremes, but just in normal day-to-day life, nothing is necessarily, you got the job, you didn't get the job, right? You met a person, you didn't meet a person. Like, I don't know, what if I had done research with Ellen or met her as an undergraduate rather than a fully formed adult? Would that have been better or worse? That question doesn't have an objective answer, right? It's all about the way you view things. So one of the things she mentions a lot is finding the advantage in the situation. It's not a silver lining. It's not like, man, my life sucks, but on the other hand, I get, 5 minutes of sunshine in my prison warden or whatever. It's not the silver lining. It's finding the advantage. Thank God I'm in this situation because now I can do this that I couldn't have otherwise done. Does that make sense? I think that's an incredibly powerful idea.
How's that different from coping? How's that different from a cope?
It's like night and day. So, but maybe you can explain what you mean by coping. Maybe it's not that different.
Well, coping, you're in a situation you don't want to be in, or something bad has happened to you, and in order to cope with it, you are consciously trying to reframe it in a way that you can deny how bad it is.
Yeah, that doesn't sound healthy. from what I understand. Maybe it is. I have no idea about that research. But the mindfulness perspective, as I understand Dr. Langer's research, is the following. Whatever situation you're in, it's not that it's necessarily bad or good. It's you have an opportunity to do something now that you might never have done before. Sometimes she uses this expression like, you never know what might happen. Maybe you meet the love of your life, right? Being in this situation, there's something that you can do that you're in this situation that you otherwise would not have been able to do. And there's an advantage in it. It has nothing to do with, I have to avoid thinking of the negative. There's no avoidance. It's a more mindful approach than just rewriting a narrative or reframing. That's orthogonal to it. That's not the approach of mindfulness. I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
Well, you mentioned the 5 minutes a day you can see out of your prison cell, right? So the cope there would be saying, oh, well, I don't even know what a cope would be if you're in solitary confinement and you really do see the world for an hour a day in the yard and you're alone for all this time. That seems like, at least I imagine it to be, a completely negative, miserable experience. It seems to be hopeless, sad, and anything that is reframing or anything that's coming up with saying, well, it's not actually as bad as it's not actually as bad. That seems like a cope. It seems like anybody who has a choice would choose not to be in that situation.
Maybe the prison's not a great example because you have no exit, right? Mm-hmm. And let's avoid extreme situations because that's kind of not the issue. But in your personal life, if you're in a situation, let's say right now we're talking, mm-hmm. and you're like, God, this interview is going terribly. I hate this guy. I want to leave, right? You could think of it that way. Or you could see, what is it in this situation in my life that has brought us here today that makes this the most important thing that's happening in the universe right now, this conversation? It might change someone who's listening, their approach, their perspective, their view on life, right? We might have an even deeper connection, right? We might come up with new ideas that we would otherwise not have but for this conversation. That's taking the advantage of what you have, as opposed to, yeah, but I'll get through it, right? That would be more of a coping. At least I have some water, thank God, right? That's not taking advantage. That's a silver lining approach, which is different.
Mm-hmm. So silver lining is ignoring the actual situation for ancillary things that are positive. So it's trying to shift focus from the negative towards something positive, whereas what you're saying is accepting the situation as it is and seeing the opportunity within it.
Exactly. So one example she gives is in Google. Google has revolutionized the workforce 10, 20 years ago of they would bring in bean bags and it makes it a nice environment and ping pong tables and whatever. That seems like a good thing, right? But that's actually a silver lining approach. It's making what you're doing, it's affirming that what you're doing is annoying work and adding a little bit of razzle-dazzle to make it nicer and more palatable. Right? That's a coping thing. It insists that work is bad. Better would be find a way to make the work itself enjoyable. She has a great example. I hope I'm allowed to mention this. She mentioned it in her research lab. Her research lab is amazing. It's on Zoom. People join it. There's so many insights there. One that she has shared many times, so I feel I can comfortably share it here as well, is an idea she had for how to teach children to potty train. Now, the typical approach is a coping or silver lining thing. Oh, you went potty, have a candy. You went potty, have a candy, right? But she thinks, wouldn't it be cool to have an invention where every time they go, let's say they go number one, okay? The color changes. So it becomes a rainbow or something else. That makes the process itself enjoyable, right? Just finding the advantage in what you're doing rather than, I'd rather do it in my diapers, but here, this way I get a candy. Does that distinction make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's a very interesting idea. How has it changed your life? And what are the benefits? And if there are any costs, what are the costs?
I haven't seen any costs in 50 years of research. I've asked her this a few times. What are the costs? If you're going to be doing something, why not be there? So it's better to be there. In my life, the things I've noticed were subtle, and I didn't notice them until later. That what was happening is, have you ever wanted somebody you're talking to just shut up? You just stop talking, that doesn't happen often to me, but it's happened, especially if you have like a political discussion or something where you feel like the other person is just nuts, right? And you want them to. I noticed that after meeting Ellen, it doesn't happen anymore at all. When it does happen, or I feel an urge, I just notice that this means that I don't want them to speak because they might challenge something that I'm thinking about, right? I'm being mindless. So finding the advantage in that situation, I tend to interrupt. I wouldn't say less or more, but in different context. I interrupt like a normal communication style interruption, not to quiet someone down, whether it's a friend or family member or a stranger. You come to appreciate people's perspectives. The biggest thing is, whenever you're meeting somebody, when you're mindless, you think, what can they do for me? Or, if you're at a job interview, gosh, I hope this goes well, or stress. Or if you're giving a talk or a lecture, boy, I really hope it goes well and I don't forget my lines or whatever I'm supposed to do. But if you're taking this take advantage of every situation, mindfulness approach, then when you meet somebody, the specifics of the situation are so far below what could really happen, which is a genuine human connection. If you're at an interview and you realize I'm not meeting a title, insert title here, I'm meeting a human being. Maybe they'll hire me, maybe they won't. Maybe we'll be friends, maybe we won't. But every interaction between two human beings is so unique and powerful and special that it's a shame to waste it by thinking of it transactionally.
That's a beautiful sentiment. And you've heard of this NPC meme, right? Non-playable character, where people are regurgitating arguments that they haven't come up with independently or thought through the ramifications of.
Yes.
And when you hear somebody going through and acting like an NPC right in front of you, and they are saying the same argument you've heard 1,000 times, which is fallacious, you don't want to interrupt them. You don't want to escape that. You think that it's legitimately challenging your beliefs, or are you trying to establish a human connection and just forgiving them their ignorance?
Oh, you've raised a lot of things there we'll talk about. First, let's just, for me, I just want to make sure I'm not an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been, I'm sure, in my life. Every time we've been mindless, we've been kind of an NPC. I'll give you an allegory. I hope you don't take this literally. Maybe it's literally true. I have no idea. Suppose we're living in a simulation, okay? And there are literally non-playable characters that are controlled by AI or little AI bots. Maybe the number of people who are controlling us is limited to some number, and they can only be in certain people, right? So that's where mindfulness comes from, is now you're being controlled by somebody, right? You're doing something interesting. There's somebody literally present within you. I think that analogy fails because I don't think there's a limit. I think everybody on earth could be simultaneously perfectly 100% mindful. But that helped me early on to understand what kind of an allegory for what mindfulness might be. It's that there is somebody looking out through the eyes, right? When you're talking to, like you said, someone who seems to be acting like an NPC, there's no one behind the eyes. It's kind of closed off, right? They're gazing somewhere else. They're attending to something else, that they're not really there. They're regurgitating, their knee-jerk reaction. Now, the second issue you raised is if I'm talking to somebody, I feel like I'm being as mindful as I can be. I'm noticing new things. I'm appreciating uncertainty. I understand their perspectives. And they are being mindless. There's two things you can do. Three actually. One is one is just bad. You could think that they're mindless and then you just walk away from them or whatever. You become mindless. That would be a lose-lose. Second thing you could do is just by being mindful. This is one of the most amazing parts of research that Dr. Langer has run, is there's a sort of contagion with mindfulness. So let me explain one experiment. You're sitting here, okay, and I'm just standing next to you, like over your shoulder. I'm a Confederate, so I'm part of the experiment, and I'm in one of two conditions. Either I have been induced to be mindless or to be mindful. That's it, and I just stand there. I do nothing else. Now you are reading a card or doing some kind of task. For example, you're reading a card that says, Mary had a little lamb. Most people, when they're mindless, they don't notice the extra A. right? So you would just, I give you the card and I take it back. I say what it'd say. You don't notice the double A. So if someone is mindless, basically you won't notice the double A. If someone is just standing next to you and is mindful, you will notice the double A. So that mindfulness jumps to nearby people. And she has a lot of other similar experiments that show the same sort of thing, that mindfulness can also be contagious. So just by being mindful with an NPC, see, what you want to avoid is being dragged into the same discussion that you've had, I'm sure, a billion times. They say a talking point, you say a talking point, right? Then you've both become mindless. But if you notice something new about what they're saying, something new about their argument that you may not have heard before, something new about their approach or what they're passionate about, remember, there is a higher level than just trying to have a debate. There's a connection with a human being.
It's very interesting. When the Confederate was standing behind the subject, did the subject interact in any way with the Confederate? Did the subject see the Confederate
Yes,
before
there's a person there.
Did they see them before they sat down?
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
they tell you, you're going to sit down, there's this guy standing next to you, that's it. So you know what's happening. The only difference is sometimes they're mindless and sometimes they're mindful.
So is there an explanation of why that mindfulness is contagious? What could explain that contagion aside from, maybe prompting?
Have you ever met a charismatic person who just blew you away?
Yes.
Didn't you feel different afterwards?
Yes.
That's mindful contagion.
Mm-hmm. So we don't know the cause, but it's very evident, and this is proven.
Well, we can try researching the cause. I think it's something like, look, if you're talking and I'm sort of drifting away, you're going to drift away. But if I'm noticing things about you and, wow, this looks interesting and this, whatever, even if I say nothing, you will feel seen and you will feel like someone is looking around at stuff, right? There's observation happening. There's a mindfulness presence around here. I think it's something like that. It could be micro movements, right? But when you sense that there is something worthy of attention here, you become more attentive as well.
So how do you induce mindfulness?
The simplest thing is, as Alan Langer puts it, just notice 3 new things. That's base case. That's the simplest way to do it, because everything we talked about. Then you start noticing things you didn't know, and uncertainty and different perspectives. More generally, it's you can do it in almost any way. We can, like when we're doing research, we might change the instructions a little bit to more fit the domain that we're studying. When we did our study with cognitive biases, we actually used my daughter Estella's automated spot the difference. So it's either an easy spot the difference or a hard one. And if it's easy, you can mind, oh yeah, there's a missing whatever. But if it's mindful, you have to look and you have to start noticing new things. We used some Wolfram stuff. So if there's a cellular automaton that's kind of easy and obvious what's happening, right? No complexity, then you're probably inducing more towards mindlessness. And if you have something that has a lot of intricacies and you can see certain patterns and you have to think about it and you compute a little more, then you're presumably becoming more mindful. And of course, the noticing 3 new things, maybe some optical illusions. Sometimes, like the vases and faces, it's black and white, it's easy to spot. If it's color, it's a little bit harder. Things like that, just to get you noticing novelty. And coming to appreciate that. Nothing is perfect. You're not going to get 100% mindful and 100% mindless, but you can start to see certain differences there. That's for an experimental situation. Let me tell you about 2 experiments that Dr. Langer ran, 20, 30 years ago that are amazing. One is vacuum salesman. So you have a pitch. The text is not going to change between conditions. You literally rehearse exactly what you're going to say. In one condition, the mindless one, you're told to think about the best time, the best sales job you ever did, and to try to replicate that. Now that sounds like good advice, doesn't it? And yet it makes you mindless because you're repeating. You're not noticing anything new, right? It seems like it should work. What would be the mindful version? The mindful version, this is such a brilliant twist you did. Sell it as you would sell it, but change your delivery in a way that only you would notice. The customer, you think, would not notice what you're changing, right? What a difference. Like if you had to guess, forgetting everything we've talked about today, if you had to guess which of those two did better, you might think this one, right? They're doing their best. This one doing some novelty. Who cares, right? Far and away, the salesmen do much better with the novelty, the mindfulness approach than the mindless. Another similar one was with an orchestra, mindlessly playing, again, the exact same instructions, replicate the best performance you ever had of this symphony, play it exactly like that, as best as you can, versus try to play the symphony different in a way that you think only you will notice. Just you on your violin or whatever, you'll do something that you'll hear, you'll notice, but you think nobody else will. Record both and let people listen to both and see which they prefer. Overwhelmingly, people prefer the mindfully generated music. So there's something there, maybe to answer your question about contagion, right? When you're doing things mindfully, the world around you is changing.
That's very, very interesting. What are the other effects of being mindful?
Longevity, health, creativity, leadership, insight, knowledge generation, virtually anything. I kind of think of mindfulness as a necessary requirement in order to generate unique knowledge, right? In the way that we've talked about with David Deutsch and explanations and Popperian style. I don't think if you're mindless, I could be wrong, this is a hypothesis, I don't think if you're mindless that you can generate new explanations.
Mm-hmm. Does it increase your rationality?
So that's one of the papers we wrote together on cognitive biases and mindfulness. So the cognitive biases are standard stuff like noticing the double A, for example, or loss aversion, or any of these standard questions like do you think there are more words in the dictionary that start with the letter R or have R in the third letter, right? All sorts of biases. We put them into mindless and mindful conditions, and it seems that in the mindful condition, they answered far more rationally, in quotes, like more survey rational. The way the original proponents of the experiments would have suggested was more rational, much more, on 19 out of the 22 different biases that we computed. So in a sense that mindfulness made you more rational, but mindfulness and rationality they're not the same thing. So consider, for example, Daniel Kahneman, System 1 and System 2, okay? He would say that System 1 is the knee-jerk, quick thinking, decision-making, right? And System 2 is more of a thoughtful and deliberate system of thinking, making decisions. Now, multiplying 3 times 5, that would be System 1. Multiplying 87 by 49, that would be more deliberate, right? That would be the System 2 in his perspective. But the way Dr. Langer thinks about it is either one of those could be mindless or mindful. And most likely, most of those are pretty mindless. Like when you're multiplying 2-digit numbers, you're not like thinking about new things. Boy, I wonder if I can have some sort of group or whatever. No, you're just doing rote multiplication. So it's not System 1 is mindless, System 2 is mindful. That's not the case, even though one is presumably more rational than the other. So one of the questions that we asked was Shane Frederick's cognitive reflection test. A bat and a ball together cost $110. The bat costs... how does it work? $110 together. The bat costs $10 more, $5 more than whatever it is. They cost together $110. How much more does the bat cost than the ball? I don't remember the question for some reason. The other question is, if 5 machines can make 5 widgets in 5 minutes, how many widgets would 100 machines make in 100 minutes? Or there's a patch of lily pads that doubles in size every day. Right, and it takes 48 days to cover the entire pond. How long would it take to cover half the pond?
It's 47 days, right?
It's 47. So most people would think 48, something like divide by 2. I got this. It's 24, right? But it's 47 because it's the day before. So those measure the ability. Those are great tests because those are highly correlated to IQ. You pass, you win. That's awesome. But many people get it wrong because there's an instinct to answer a question that's not quite exactly what was asked. Another one was Linda. You know the Linda problem. Linda is 31 years old. She's single. She used to work on anti-nuclear demonstrations. She's very bright. That was her major in college, environmental science or something. Which is more likely, Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? And it's a conjunction fallacy because it can't be the case that a feminist bank teller is more probable than a bank teller that's either feminist or non-feminist, right? People get that wrong because they think representativeness bias. Or if you see someone on a train that looks like the perfect nerd, right? They've got the things and the things and the things, and a stack of dusty books, and they're looking through it. Is it more likely that they're a curator or some archivist at a museum, or that they're a salesman? Which is more likely? Now, they fit the mold of the curator, archivist much more, but how many of those are there on Earth? How lucky would you be to see one, right? It's most likely it's a slightly eccentric salesperson because there's billions of salespeople, right? That's another fallacy that people have, which on all of those metrics, once you're mindful, you tend to answer better. But better in the sense that it's closer to the rational. See, each of those answers could be answered by a mindful person in the exact opposite direction. So the Linda and the feminist bank teller. I might think you're a bit of a bozo for asking me that question. Presumably you meant to say non-feminist in the original, in the other one, right? Like I give you the benefit of the doubt for being incorrect with your wording. Another common example is they ask people, which is more likely to be spilled, coffee or hot coffee? And of course, hot coffee is a subset of coffee, but if you ask that of human beings, they might say hot coffee. Is it because they're being irrational? Maybe they're mindfully answering it that way because well, you said coffee, but presumably you're not an idiot. You probably meant non-hot coffee since you said hot coffee later, right? So with those caveats aside, yes, putting people in a more mindful state on average does tend to make them answer these cognitive bias questions better, but it could be that at the extremes, the mindful people might answer differently. The biggest prediction of mindfulness is that it would be an increase in variability. Mindlessness, you tend to be much more predictable. Mindful people or people in a mindful condition would tend to answer with more variation.
And how's that linked to creativity?
This is I think one of the best experiments she's done on creativity. You put people in a room in a group, and what an awesome little. She has all these like a little twist, and suddenly the world changes. Two groups, they don't see each other. One group is told, "This is a dog's rubber chew toy. This is a paperclip. This is a napkin, whatever." And then later, you are put into a situation where you've made a list or something, and we made a mistake. You have to erase it. What do you use to erase it? Oh, there's no eraser. Can't do it. Okay, we give up. The other group, same thing, but the only difference is at the beginning we told them, this may be a paperclip. This may be a dog's rubber chew toy. Just may versus is. Conditional, absolute. And in the conditional example, that was the only example from which people thought to use the dog's rubber chew toy as an eraser. Now, if you ask somebody, can a dog's rubber chew toy be an eraser? Yeah, right, sure. But coming to think of that in a creative way requires mindfulness.
Do you think the world is becoming more mindful or mindless?
I don't know how to measure that. I'd love to measure it. But I'll tell you this, as you yourself become more mindful, you'll start to notice people becoming more mindful around you. Possibly because of contagion, possibly because of selection bias or Dunning-Kruger effect, I don't know. But here's another thing we wrote about. So there's level 1, 2, and 3. If you see somebody doing an action that you could interpret as if they're being mindless or as if they're being mindful, it doesn't matter what the truth is. If you interpret their activity as if they're being mindful, you will become more mindful and they will become more mindful. Does that make sense?
So you're creating your reality.
Yes. Exactly.